on the council,
Okay, Ellen.
like, in terms of internet, everywhere.
Good afternoon. This is welcome to our very first speaker series. This is hosted by the Hot Springs County Republican Party. However, this is not nonpartisan. It is open to the public and free food. And I think free food is always a good draw. And we are planning to do these once a month. If you have any ideas of any things you would like to hear about, please write it down in the back. I think next month we're going to have somebody speak on, I don't know the title of it. I'm not allowed to write titles anymore, but I think it's going to be called pretty much like kind of wokeism in the schools. You know, CRT in the schools, or should we have it, should we not have it, you know, all that kinds of stuff. So that's going to be next week. We have Tom Kelly's going to be speaking on that. He ran for superintendent of schools and he pulled out of the race at one point. He's a brilliant guy. He's been in all aspects of the school system. He has a child with Down syndrome. He has 6 other kids. I mean, he's been public, private. He knows the whole rope. So he's going to be a really good speaker. Not that Dan isn't also, but, and then after that, we're going to probably have our representative, John Winter, and our Senator Ed Cooper, maybe give us a report on what happened in the legislature this year. So that'll be at the end of March. And come there and ask them questions because they work for us, right? We're thinking of having we're going to do some wildlife management, have somebody in here to talk about grizzly bear predation, wolves, things like that. Direct air carbon capture, which is coming into our state, where they're going to be putting up one of the first or the biggest in the United States, direct air carbon capture, where they pull CO2 out of the air. On our dime, and then just things like that. So just issues that may affect not only us here in Thermopolis or in Hot Springs County, but in Wyoming as well. So we're going to have maybe Moms for Liberty. We would like to have some panel discussions, like have somebody from pro Medicaid expansion and somebody against Medicaid expansion to come here and just have maybe a moderated discussion, or you can ask them questions. Why are you against Medicaid expansion? Why are you for Medicaid expansion? Things like that. So if you have any other ideas, we would be happy to look at those. Okay. But today, this is going to be, and I'm glad you're all here, but this should be really fascinating. Our property taxes affect all of us, and they are definitely going up. And we want to know why, right? How much they expected to go up? What is the current legislation on it? And like Dan and I were discussing, they passed bills and failed bills at 3:00 yesterday. So trying to stay abreast of that is pretty difficult. But our assessor here is Daniel Weber. He's been, as you all probably know, he's been an employee of the Hot Springs County Assessor's Office since December of 2004. He was appointed to the position of assessor in January of 2018 and elected for the position in November. It took that long? In November, yeah, it was election of 2018. During his time in the office, he has accumulated over 700 hours of training approved by the Wyoming Department of Revenue. He received temporary certification as a property tax appraiser in 2005 and permanent certification in 2006. And since that time, he has conducted a physical on-site inspection of every parcel in the county at least 2 times. I know he's been at my house. So, and thank you so much for doing this for us. We really appreciate it. So I will turn the floor over.
Sure. Welcome. I didn't want to stand up here today and just read off the slides, read at you. What I prefer to do is pull up information that's publicly available on the internet and show it to you, not only where it's at, but how to use it, what all is there, so that if you guys have other questions, maybe you can find the answers for yourself online. So as I go through this, I'm going to work on the internet and show you all the information that we put out there. First thing I'd like to do is just give a brief explanation of what the county assessor's office does. 1 hour would not be enough time to go into very much detail. So I will leave time at the end for questions. I'm assuming that there's going to be quite a few. Then I'll get into an explanation of what happened in 2022 with property taxes. As most of you know, there was a pretty good increase, not just in Hot Springs County, but throughout Wyoming as a whole. I'll do my best to explain why that happened, and then we'll talk about the current legislature and the slew of bills that they're tackling right now to try and fix the well, you know, I don't know if I'd call it a problem, but they're going to try to lower people's property taxes. So we'll try to get through all those bills, and then lots of questions. We'll have plenty of time to go over that. So first off, what does the assessor's office do? First thing, we don't set taxes in the assessor's office. What we do is we value all taxable property in Hot Springs County as of January 1st. So it's kind of a snapshot on January 1st of everything that's there. The owner doesn't change, and none of the characteristics of the property change after that date. So that's why you see us out there towards the end of December, early January, trying to see what is complete on new construction, what new buildings have been built. That's the time that we're out there doing it. I would prefer it was July 1st because January 1st is not the best time to go measure new houses, but that's what it is. If you look on our website, you'll see right there that our goal is to accurately, equitably, and fairly value all property in the county. So in order to do that, we value property at market value. So that's the price that a willing buyer would pay for property, and a willing seller would accept for property, not under any duress. Besides market value, we also do agricultural value, which is essentially the productive value of land. That gets pretty complicated. Then you're looking at soil types from the NRCS and trying to determine how much that land could produce. That value is typically quite a bit less than market value, as most of you know. Always people, trying to get that agricultural exemption. We also value commercial personal property. So, that includes all of the property in every business in the county, every restaurant, farms and ranches. We're valuing tractors, construction companies. We're valuing all their equipment. And then state assessed property. So that's going to be your public utilities, railroads, and minerals. The Department of Revenue actually sets those values, gives them to us, and we put them on our local tax roll. In order to arrive at market value, we use a process known as mass appraisal. It's widely different than fee appraisal. When you bought your house, you probably had a guy come out and he found some comparable sales and gave you a value for your property. That's really not at all what we do in the assessor's office. We're looking at all of the sales countywide for the last 3 years. And that's important. We'll be coming back to that 3-year timeline. And then we're grouping them into neighborhoods and using those sales within those neighborhoods to set the value of all of the properties within those neighborhoods. It's really the only way to manage such a large number of properties. We reappraise them every year. And I mean, Hot Springs County, as you know, is really small compared to some of the other counties. There's counties 10, 20 times bigger than us. So it can be a big undertaking. After all property that's locally assessed has a value on it, we send an abstract to the State Board of Equalization and the Department of Revenue, and they also get the statistics from the sales that we're looking at. And they run a statistical test against it, and we have to meet their standards. And if we've done that, then they go ahead and approve our abstract, which is our locally assessed value. After that, I get the state assessed values. Again, those minerals, public utilities, and railroads. And that's where most of the valuation for the county comes from. That's added to the tax roll. And then I arrive at a county valuation. So if you pull up our website on the assessor's page over here, there's a tab called 2022 General Information. And the assessed valuation for Hot Springs County is listed right here. It goes on to show the highest county in Wyoming, the lowest, and then our neighboring county, Washakie, what their value was, and shows our top 10 taxpayers. If you keep scrolling down, you can see the assessed valuation for all counties listed alphabetically and ranked in order of value, and you can see that we are quite a ways down there. So right down at the bottom, we're just above Washakie, mainly from we have higher mineral production than they do, and that's where the majority of our valuation comes from. So that abstract showing our assessed value, this is what that looks like. So, locally, we were sitting here at about 60 million, and then minerals coming in at 93. So you can see that's where the majority of our value comes from, for a total last year of 166 million assessed dollars. After the county valuation is set, I send it out to each taxing entity, and they use the county valuation to determine what their mill levy is going to be. They go through a process of publicly posting that. They all, mostly, I shouldn't say all, but most of them have a board that meets and approves that in a public hearing that anybody is welcome to go to and question. Ask them about their budget, why they're requesting what they are. So the breakdown of those tax dollars is shown in a pretty neat graph on here. Well, our valuation mostly comes from oil on that one, but if you keep going through all this, and there's a lot to read here, so I encourage everybody to go and look at this, but you'll see where all those tax dollars are going percentage-wise. One thing that I think is important to point out is when you go pay your property tax bill, you're thinking it's all going to the county. In reality, the county gets about 17% of that on average. So the majority of it is going to the school. So what's that, 46%? Then you got your special purpose districts, that's water and sewer districts, things like that. And then the towns are this small slice down here. The school also, the state school foundation fund gets 17%. So if you put those two together, that's a pretty big share, almost 3/4 of the pie. After mill levies are approved by the county commissioners, I apply them in each tax district, generate a tax roll. I send it over to Julie in the county treasurer's office, and she generates tax bills and sends them out to you. And I have an example of a tax bill on here. I think that was in the ad that I would go over this with you. So your tax bill looks something like this. It should have a total assessed value that number comes from my office, and then it should show the mill levy applied against that assessed value, which will equal your total taxes. And it does show on these bills a complete breakdown where every penny of your tax bill goes. So, you all should be looking at that and just paying attention to where all that money is going. It's broken down pretty clearly here. Some of these districts have their own boards. A lot of these are apportioned by the county commissioners. So things like the library, the fair, the museum, the airport, civil defense, public health, those all fall under that 17% that the county gets. It's just the commissioners determine how it's dispersed amongst them. So if we do have a lot of folks come in our office, say that they've lost their tax bill, can we get a copy? Well, it's all online. So as well as the notices of value from our office, I should have shown you this one earlier. This is what you get in April from us that shows the name of the property owner on January 1st. It'll show you the total valuation that we put on your property for the year. And one important thing to point out on here is this level of assessment, which is different for the three different classes of property. So the reason why the mineral value makes up such a large portion of our county valuation is they're actually assessed at 100% of their value. So they are assessed at market value, whereas your house is assessed at 9.5% of market value. Yes, so I'm pointing this out because this is going to be one area that a lot of bills in the legislature are going to target right here to try to change your property taxes. Industrial property sits at 11.5%. So there's three classes of property. There's minerals, industrial property, and all other property. So all other property is at 9.5%. That includes commercial property, personal property, real property, basically all the other classes. I'm pointing that out because that's another area that the legislature is really focused on, is splitting out residential property to make it different so that they can assess it different from commercial property. So why did taxes increase so much in 2022? That's probably the real reason why everybody's here, right? So basically what it comes down to is that the market value of residential and commercial property increased dramatically from 2020 to 2022. Earlier I said I'm using the last 3 years of sales to arrive at market value. So once you have 3 years of heavy increases that are being factored into the market value, you're going to see a large increase. The factors that increase that market value so much, besides just the selling price of homes, there's also, inflation. Inflation is pretty high. And one of the first things we do when we look at market value is we derive a cost for every building, just like an insurance company does. A replacement cost new. We depreciate it as well, but those replacement costs, because of the price of lumber and all materials in general, concrete, windows, doors, all that stuff is going up dramatically. So that affects the market value as well. I mean, somebody's not going to sell their house for much less than what it would cost to build one of the same quality now. So because those commodities go up, so does the market value. Another thing that affected assessed values going up was low interest rates that we had at the time. That's now turned around, but the low interest rates affected the agricultural properties because it was so cheap to borrow money, it made their productive value much higher. It's kind of hard to explain. It's a formula that they use to arrive at that productive value, but because those interest rates were low, agricultural properties increased as well as market value on properties. So the reasons for the selling prices going up, basically in Hot Springs County, we have relatively few parcels. We only have about 4,300 parcels. That includes personal property. So if you take that out, we probably have 3,700 parcels of land in the county. So when you have few properties and very high demand for it, that's going to drive the prices up. In 2019, we had 46 sales of real property. So those were valid sales, meaning willing buyer, willing seller, not including those of parents to their kids, those kind of things. That increased 80% in 2020 to 83 sales and 145% to 113 sales in 2021. So, it basically nearly tripled in 2 years. That's just the number of sales. That has since leveled off. This year, we're looking at being back down around 70. So it's still higher, but it's not going up anymore. The reasons for that happening, of course, people like to blame COVID. I think that probably did play a large effect into driving people to want to come here, whether it's just they want to be in a less densely populated area. There's lots of political reasons. Do I expect it to keep increasing at this rate? I would say this time, no. It looks like the number of sales is slowing down, and although they're not decreasing, it looks like the sales prices have kind of leveled off. They're not climbing like they have the previous 2 years. So although I don't expect values to go down this year, I don't expect the large increases. So on average in Hot Springs County last year, we went up about 16% on residential properties. That seems like a lot, but if you look at some other counties, Park County, Fremont County, Teton County, they saw increases of 40 to 50%, even higher in some classes of houses. So that's really where most of the noise is coming from, is those kind of destination places where the people that do come here, that's where they want to live. They want to live in Jackson and Cody and Lander and Sheridan. The counties like ours and, Rock Springs, Rawlins, those type of places, we didn't see as large of increases, although we did see an increase. So I don't know if that's reassuring or not, but so what is the legislature looking to do to help with property tax relief? So another source that you guys can look at, and many of you are probably familiar with this, but you can pull up the state of Wyoming legislature page, and you can come down here and pull up all general session bills that they're currently looking at. I usually, just to make things a little easier, there's a lot. You can search up here in the title, so if you just pull up property taxes, you can see that's how many we're looking at now. And there's more than that. If they don't say property and tax in the title, it won't pull them up in that search. So just while I was writing this talk yesterday, between yesterday and today, there was already 2 new ones introduced that I noticed. So there's probably going to be more on there by tomorrow. There's kind of 2 categories of help that they're looking at. There's going to be short-term immediate relief, which is going to be in the form of a tax exemption, and then there's more long-term changes to the tax structure, the way that we arrive at our value, maybe even changing away from market value. Those are more long-term changes. So I kind of categorize them in 2 different ways. So looking at the short-term, more immediate changes first. The most popular exemption we have right now is the veterans exemption. So if you're a honorably discharged veteran who has served overseas or a surviving spouse of one, you can come into our office and fill out a form and get $3,000 of assessed value exempted off of your property. So going back to this number, if this account's assessed value is $11,128, if they were a veteran, they would say $3,000 down here, and they would pay, instead of paying on $11,128, they would pay on $8,128 when this went to the tax roll. So I don't know if I have a veteran close here, but that's how that works. So there is a bill, it's House Bill 227 that's introduced that looks to double that from $3,000 to $6,000. So, which it sounds great, but the problem with these bills, or this bill in particular, is that the state of Wyoming actually refunds the counties for this loss of revenue. So just 2 years ago, the discussion at the legislature was not funding this anymore at all. And 2 years later, now they're talking about doubling it. So the concern that I have with that is, what's going to happen when oil's not $100 a barrel? When it goes back down to $30 or $40 a barrel, are they going to be able to support that? Highly unlikely. It's questionable if they could support it now, doubling it, along with some of these other ideas that they've got. So another current exemption out there is the property tax refund program. So this is administered by Julie in the county treasurer's office, and it provides relief based on income. Again, it's funded by the legislature, so the county is reimbursed for this, and it'll pay up to, I believe, half of someone's property taxes. They have to pay it and then apply and get refunded for it. So again, this 2 years ago, this was not even funded at all. It is currently funded right now, and probably will be again this year. And House Bill 99 has been introduced that would actually make it a lot easier to qualify for this. It's going to raise that income limit, and it's also going to increase the amount that they would refund you. So just like the veterans exemption, I think this is a really good program, but if you make it too broad and too much of a refund, how long are they going to be able to fund it is the question. Again, when the state of Wyoming doesn't have the money, what's going to happen to it then? The next idea, and these are not exemptions that are currently in place, but this is something that I personally am heavily in favor of, is a homeowner's or a homestead exemption. And there's two bills out there pertaining to those right now. There's House Bill 54, which would exempt $100,000 of fair market value on your primary residence. So the thing I like about the homeowner homestead exemption is they all apply to the house that somebody lives in. And the goal, and from all the meetings that we've had, even with legislatures, has been, they don't want people to lose their homes because they can't afford the taxes on it. And these exemptions are immediate, and they would go directly to people's property taxes on the house that they live in. So, if you owned more than one house, it would not apply to that second house. The Wyoming County Assessors Association, we met down in Cheyenne on January 10th, and we went over the bills that had been introduced at the time, and this was one of them. And we actually voted to take no action on this one and instead vote to support House Bill 98, which is another homestead exemption, except it would exempt 25% of your fair market value up to $50,000 on your primary residence, but you have to have lived in the house for 5 years. So, not everybody that moves here would qualify, but after 5 years you would. Going back to the veterans exemption, on it as well, you have to live here for 3 years. So that's something we're tracking every year in our office as people move here and come in and apply, is when they become eligible for it. So those are the two homestead exemptions that are currently out there, and I expect that there's going to be amendments made to those as they go through the process. Going through some of the other ideas, and I'll go through these rather quickly. Some of these are pretty far out there. Some of them actually are pretty good ideas. Property tax deferral, which is House Bill 121, would defer half of your property taxes until the owner dies, abandons, or sells the property, at which time the property taxes would come due. So, if you think of elderly people not being able to pay their taxes, this could help them. It could put a burden on their family, depending on how many years they deferred this and how much it added up to, how much the property was worth. But it's an idea that's out there. There's the elderly and veterans exemption, and this falls under House Bill 125. This is a neat idea. They want to exempt 100% of property taxes for people over 65 or honorably discharged veterans if you have lived in your home for 15 years. So this would be administered through our office. Proving that somebody lived in a house for 15 years could be, I don't really know how we would do that off the top of my head. I know we can see when you bought the property, but proving that you have actually lived in it for 15 years would be, I guess you would just have to sign an affidavit, and we would have to take you at your word on that. But that's an idea that's out there. There's the Property Tax Relief Authority. This is Senate File 90. This would actually create a board to go out and secure money to loan people to pay their property taxes. I'm not really sure what the thought is there. I mean, I wouldn't want to take out a loan to pay my property taxes, but I guess if you were in a bad situation, maybe it could help somebody out for a year until things improved, and and they could pay that back. So another idea is the property tax mill levy adjustment. Going back to the tax bills, we're looking at in this tax district, this mill levy, but then breaking it down over here, you can see like right here the school had 25 mills, the town of Thermopolis has 8 mills, and then the county actually has 12 mills, and it's a factor of a bunch of these added together. So what this bill looks to do is to put a cap on the mill levy that schools, towns, and counties could levy based upon inflation. So if the rate of inflation was less than the increase they would get due to the increase in the valuation of the property, it would be capped at that amount of inflation. So how they're gonna determine that and set that, I don't know. Seems kind of like a headache, but it could probably be done, and it might be good to put caps on those. I'm not sure if that's the best way to do it or not. There's the property tax, limiting the max taxable value increase. So this is it's not really a new idea. This is essentially what California does through Proposition 13. I don't know if some of you know what that is or not, but under Senate File 125, your assessed value cannot increase by more than 5% per year unless you made a change to the property. So if you built something new, that would not be factored into that 5%. This would apply right now to that other class of property, all other property that I was talking about earlier. So this would include commercial property, personal property, residential property. I'm not really sure how this could be administered. The problem that I see with this is, you know, if somebody builds a deck on their house, how would we separate the value of that deck from the entire value? Know when it was built. You'd have to track every improvement every year from then on, and not apply the 5% to those after this law went into effect and apply it to things before that. I'm not really sure if that's administrable or not. I mean, somebody could probably write a computer program to do it, but it's not me. I know that. There's the property tax relief assessment rate reduction. This is Senate File 136. So this goes back to that 9.5% and 11.5% that you see on your notice value right here. So what they're looking to do there is decrease that to 7.5% on all other properties. So that would be commercial and personal property as well. Just to point out, lowering that number by 2% does not necessarily lower your taxes by 2%. I did a quick calculation on just a house worth $100,000. It actually worked out to a 21% reduction in taxes. So that 2% of the assessment rate makes a pretty big difference actually on your taxes. So that's, you know, that is an easy to change, easy to administer exemption. Well, it wouldn't be an exemption. It would lower that number, which is very easy to do. There's Senate File 110, and that is the personal property tax exemption. So that bill is actually looking at just removing all tangible personal property. So, you know, farmers would not pay property taxes on their tractors anymore. Every business in town would no longer get sent those lists that we sent out on January 1st that show all of their equipment. That would just go away. It sounds like a great idea, and really it's a giant headache for me sending out those lists, except there is a considerable amount of valuation in the oil field in equipment. I don't have those numbers on me, but it's very, you know, millions and millions of dollars worth of equipment out there. So this, under this bill, that would be exempted, that would all go away. So all taxing entities would lose that valuation. There's a property tax holiday idea. This is House Bill 256. This bill would apply for 1 year, and it would reduce all industrial and mineral production taxes by 16.67% and all other taxes by 33.33% for 1 year. So I'm not sure if the thought is they would come back every year and look at changing that number and trying to pass it again. Basically, it would lower your house taxes a little over 33% if this bill was to pass. That would probably be fairly easy to administer. I would think that that would probably come from the treasurer's office, maybe from us. I'm not really sure how that would work, but that's an idea. So that sums up the short-term ideas that are out there. So looking at the long term, I see I'm already down to 20 minutes, so I'll wrap this up quick. So in the long term, they're looking at doing a constitutional amendment that will create a fourth class of property. So instead of just having minerals, industrial, and all other property, they want to create minerals, industrial, residential, real property, and all other property. So one thing to point out before we get into these anymore is mobile homes are not residential real property. Those are personal property, so they are not included in that class of property the way that these bills are currently written up. We have tried to warn them about that. So when they go in and try to change the assessed value on that residential real property, it won't be changing mobile homes. So they would still be at the same tax rate as everybody else. So that's one thing that they're gonna have to fix there. But there's 2 House joint resolutions, 1 and 2, that are currently out there. And House Joint 1 wants to create that 4th class of property and write in there that there will be a maximum percent valuation increase, which would be a cap on the amount that your value could increase every year. House Joint Resolution 2 is more broad, and it just creates the 4 different classes of property and does not put that cap on the valuation increase. So because of that, the County Assessors Association has chosen to support that House Joint Resolution 2. Really creating that 4th class of property is good and easy to do, and it's better to leave it broad, and after that happens, let the legislature decide how they want to handle it, instead of now saying they want to put the cap on it, because in 2 years, so none of these can even go on the ballot until 2024. None of them would go into effect until 2025. So as anybody who's lived here for any length of time knows, in 2 years, the revenue outlook can change dramatically. And so, if the price of oil goes down, in 2 years, they'll probably be looking at this thinking, what were we thinking? That's not going to work. There's House Joint Resolution 4. That's the same idea of the max increase on residential real property, but it doesn't break down and create it as a 4th class of property. So I don't understand how that would even work without creating that extra class, because they do want to just apply it to residential real property. But if they don't separate it out constitutionally, they can't do that. Looking at a couple more, there's Senate Joint Resolution 3. That's a property tax exemption for the elderly and infirm, which I had to look up to know what that even meant before I came over here. And so what that is looking to do is put a constitutional amendment on the ballot that would exempt property taxes for the elderly and infirm. It's very broad. I don't know, it doesn't specify who elderly people are or infirm people. Without specifying that, I'm not really sure how that would work.
Everybody want to be elderly.
Right, yeah. 40 years old and above, right? The last one is Senate Joint Resolution 12. That's a constitutional amendment to again create that 4th class of property for residential real property. Then it wants to take and set the value back to the cost value on January 1 of 2019, and take anything from that point forward that was added to the property and put it at market value. And anything that sells, this would go into effect on January 1st of 2025, because it would have to be approved on the 2024 general ballot. And so anything after that date that was to sell would be valued at market value and locked in at the market value of the year that it's sold. So again, that would be pretty tough to administer, because now, the first thing on our website is talking about being equitable, and when you start having caps on property, or valuing some properties at their sales price from 30 years ago and some at their sales price from today, then you're no longer equitable. So what would happen is you could have two identical houses, 100% identical, next to each other, and one could be paying $2,000 in property taxes, and the other could be paying $85 in property taxes if they lived there long enough. So, then you lose that equitability in that like properties would have the same valuation. So, with those ideas in mind, I guess I'll go ahead and take any questions that anybody might have either about the assessment process, or the increases that we saw, or the legislation that we just talked about. Sure.
If you don't pay your taxes, then you're in arrears, property taxes. What's the process that goes through before who gets your property?
Sure. So these two sitting in front of you probably know a lot more about that than me. So what happens is Julie, the county treasurer, will sell all of those properties that have not paid their taxes at a tax sale. So she'll sell it for 1 year, and then if you don't pay it again the next year, that same person, and correct me if I get anything wrong here, can keep paying that for up to 4 years, and after that amount of time, they can file for a tax deed on the property through the sheriff's office. So if the person wants to come in and redeem their property and pay their taxes, then they have to refund you your money, and I believe it comes with 16% interest. So it's pretty high amount. It's a pretty good investment if you come and purchase those properties at tax sale. And a lot of people do. In fact, there's usually a lot more buyers than there are properties, so they have to have a random draw system.
Daniel, you might mention that we don't get the property, we get a certificate of purchase for the taxes. The property is not being sold, it's just their taxes at those tax sales.
Correct. Yeah.
And we're not allowed to go on the property to talk to the people, to
Correct.
say, hey, you didn't pay your taxes, I'm getting your house.
You really have no rights to it
Right.
until you
Right.
actually get the tax deed for the property. So,
Right.
so it's not an immediate thing. It's not a great way to acquire property. Typically, those properties are either redeemed, or there's a reason that they're not. And if there's a reason they're not redeemed, you probably don't necessarily want it.
An example would be, and I can cite this, somebody previously may have $100,000 lien on your house. You end up with a CP, that lien could be,
Right. Yes,
If
those
it's a
liens
federal
stay
lien
with the
or
property,
local
so
lien.
you do have to be careful of all those types of things, and go into the county clerk's office and research if there are liens against the property, because you don't want to inherit those. So,
I've gotta tell one quick one real quick. 30 years of some small town mowing the weeds on a lot, the interest rate can accumulate in 30 years.
I'll bet it can.
Way more
right?
than the property.
Right, so if the town of Thermopolis comes in and mows the weeds, they'll actually put a lien on that property
Yeah.
to repay them for whoever they hired to do that. So that's a good example of
Very good.
what kind of liens can be on there. So, yeah.
I'm wondering, when it comes to, and I think this county's a little bit different, if there's properties on state properties, like,
Mhm.
The ones we have in the park here, how are those taxed? Does the state pay a tax? How is that done?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Actually, the buildings on state property are taxed as improvements only. So the land itself is exempt, but the buildings are taxed. So like the pools, even the house that the superintendent lives in is taxable over there. So the state pays taxes on that. So yeah, we go in and it's valued just like any other property, except there's no value on the land.
Am I correct in assuming that the only adjustment you have on my taxes is the value of my property? The state sets a percentage of what you're gonna tax me, but you set the value of that percentage, am I right?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
I
So
won't be mad at you anymore, Danny.
so that nine, so you're talking about the 9.5%?
Yeah.
Yes, yep. So, you know, that could go down
You
if.
have no control over that, though.
No,
Yeah.
no, that's not something that the county gets to pick that number.
Okay.
You know, maybe it's not a bad idea to have counties be able to do that because, you know, you got counties like Teton who have zero mineral production. They're the only county in Wyoming. All of their valuation comes from residential and commercial property taxes. So, you know, when they look at exemptions and lowering tax assessment ratios, those kind of things, they're looking at it different than we are because we can lower our 9.5% to 7.5%, and that affects less than half of our tax base because minerals are well over half. 60, 70%, that's untouched. So when we do it, it's not having much of an effect. When they do it, it's affecting their entire tax base. So,
Yeah.
so a lot of these bills, to me, when you're looking at applying something statewide, it doesn't make a lot of sense because every county is in a different situation.
Hmm.
So you said that 17% of the taxes stay here? Is that what you said?
No, 17% go to the county.
Oh, to the county,
Yep.
so where's the rest go?
Well, let's go back to that chart and we can talk about it. So these two
Oh,
chunks of the
okay.
pie
Thank you.
are the school, and this is the county's chunk. The blue portion is municipal, so that's the town of Thermopolis, the town of Kirby, and East Thermopolis. And then there's this special district chunk, which is going to be all of your water and sewer districts, cemetery district, hospital district, weed and pest. I think that fire district. Yeah, so the library is actually under the county, so it's part of this 17%. But all those other special districts that you can think of fall under that 16 or so percent.
So if we, as taxpayers, would like to see that chunk rearranged, we need to take that to our commissioners.
Well, the commissioners and those local boards. So really the commissioners, they can't override those local boards for those special districts. So like the weed and pest district has a board. The hospital district has a board. This obviously the school district has a board. So all of those individual boards are determining their own mill levies.
So we would go to that board.
You would have to go to that board and talk to them at their meetings, at their budget meetings, you know, while they're in that process.
Is
But
that why they're
Convince them
districts?
they need less money.
Is
yes,
that because, I mean, I have a board as well, but because I fall under Hot Springs County,
yep.
okay.
So,
But
so
if I formed a library district, I could jump over to the
yes.
special.
So, and that's what
Yeah,
Cheryl's
that's
talking
just-
about here. So there's a bill out there to give counties the authority to form emergency management service districts. So if you go through the statutes, there are all kinds of districts that can be formed. One of them that's been popular here has been the talk of a solid waste formation district. So, you know, that would then be a district that would collect taxes for the landfill. So, you know, that hasn't been a popular topic about forming that, but it's something that could be done. So, what? Go ahead, Paul, in the back.
I just was gonna say that, you know, when you look at state funding, 6 or 17% comes back to the county.
But on state funding, that, you know, by constitution, Wyoming state constitution, they're allocated to pay approximately 73% to the school system. So you look at the distribution of funds and you say, where do most of the funds go to in the state of Wyoming that are collected? They clearly go to the school system.
Correct.
That's under mandate by state constitution. So if you want to change that, you've got to go in and change the state constitution. Just like you referred to in your property taxes too, when you break out the residential, which I think is probably a pretty good idea at the end of the day, that fourth class, so you have some ability to adjust that in the long-term benefits to the taxpayers as far as homeowners.
Correct.
And so, but that again requires an amendment to the state constitution to bring that out, right?
It does, but I think more of what she's referring to would be actually just lowering those mill levies of those districts on a local level. And I was gonna add something to that as well. If you go into these districts and get them to lower their mill levies, I'm just gonna be honest with you, unless you dramatically lower them, it's not gonna have a huge effect on your tax bill. I'm not saying it's not gonna have an effect, it will, but most of the benefit from lowering a mill levy will go to mineral production. So the mineral companies will see 70% of the benefit of lowering those mill levies.
Well, but one thing, if we lowered multiple districts, we would see it more, you know, if we were purposefully going to these boards and talking to them about lowering their mill levy.
Right,
It would add up eventually.
If you're getting a half a mil from this one and a half a mil, it might add up to several mils. But again, most of it is the school, and statutorily, I think those mills are mandated as far as what they have to take. I don't think that most of those they can actually even lower.
Let's say that Stacy wants to form a district. Who determines what the mill levy will be? Don't they go ask the county commissioners and they approve or disapprove?
Well, it depends what type
Percentage?
of district it was. Probably it would have a board. So, since I've been in the assessor's office, there's been 2 districts formed. There's been the Owl Creek Water District, who has their own elected board, who determines their own mill levy, and then there's been the hospital district. And again, they have their own board who sets their own mill levy.
But now, can they charge whatever mill levy they want, or do the commissioners have to approve that 3 or 5 or 10%?
They can charge whatever mill levy they want that they are allowed to by statute.
Okay,
So every
okay.
type of district has a different cap.
That's what I wanted, yeah.
Most of those special districts are capped at 3, so like, the cemetery and the hospital and the fire district, those are capped at 3.
Okay.
Your towns are capped at 8 mills. Your water and sewer districts are capped at 8 mills.
Okay,
So-
well, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was just gonna say, you know, when you vote in a district, as a people, voting people, you're voting in the taxing authority, what you're doing. And as a general rule, most people don't wanna pay more taxes, and so it's kinda hard to get districts to pass, because it means you're gonna pay more taxes at the end of the day. You're right, they're capped by state statute, how far they can go and how much they can tax. But just like you said, like you referred to the emergency, management district, you know, we get used to, we contract out services to Mortimer's for ambulance care. Orland, they don't have anybody, so they're contracting to Cody, Park County for ambulance service. I'm not sure how that's working. I can't imagine driving all the way from Cody or Powell to provide an ambulance service, but that's what they're doing. So they're talking about having the ability as a county to create a district
Right.
in which they can collect taxes, I think like, 1.5 mil, I think total max, but anyhow, create a district that they can collect tax money so they can provide emergency services, ambulance services, EMT care. So,
Correct.
you know, but when you create a district, you're creating a taxing authority. They then have the ability, of course, it's supposed to go before the electorate for that support, but you're giving them the ability to tax you when you do that.
Right, so, you know, the important thing with that bill is, if it passes, it doesn't mean that Hot Springs County is getting an emergency management district. All it would mean is that we would have the ability to put it on the ballot to form a district. So it would still have to be approved locally by the voters within that district. That's the key. So like these water and sewer districts, it's only the people voting on it that live within the boundaries of that district.
So those property tax exemptions that you mentioned, does that include real property that's inside a trust?
Yes. As long as you live in the house. It doesn't matter if it's held in a trust or an LLC. If it's your principal residence and you are on the trust or the LLC, then you would be eligible for it. Just like the veterans exemption. So you can have it in your trust or your LLC, but you have to be an owner of the trust or the LLC.
I'm just still a little bit confused, so, when a person buys a piece of property, that's what you base it on because of willing buyer and willing seller? That's what the new cost basis becomes?
Well, no, it's so we use that sales price to set the value for all of the similar houses within that neighborhood. So, it's not that we're setting the value exactly what you paid for it, but we're using your sales price to set the market value. So if we have, 15 sales within that neighborhood, and this is very simplified, but if they all were 10% higher, the sales price than the value we had on them, in theory, those values would go up 10% to match what the sales increased.
Even for the people like next door that didn't?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So that's the market value system in Wyoming. Everybody's reappraised every year at that market value. That's why everybody's taxes went up, not just the people that bought houses.
Okay, yeah, because I could not understand that, why.
Yes, yes.
ours
It's the
went up.
entire county that's reassessed every year.
Because it, none around us had sold for that much, so. So it's the whole county.
Correct. It is the whole county, but so, when I first started, I said an hour wouldn't be enough. It's definitely not. So over in my office, I keep a document every year that's called the county narrative, and it's a detailed explanation that with maps of the county, you can see where you live, you can see what neighborhood you're in, you can see how many sales there were and which sales were used to set your value, although actual sales prices are confidential. So, that's something that the assessors for years have been in favor of overturning because, people think when we say they're confidential that we're not wanting you to see them. We want you to see them. We're not allowed by law to let you see them. So, and, we can get into the reasons as to why that's confidential. I think that's just the general attitude in Wyoming that that's not anybody's business what I paid for my property, which I can agree with that as well. But from my standpoint of my job, it'd be a lot easier if I could put those numbers out there and be like, here's the sales and here's what they were. If everybody saw them, I'd probably have nobody in my office because they'd be like, oh, wow. Yeah.
They'd find something to write.
Well, yeah, that's probably true, but yeah, Paul.
Yeah, just, a lot of questions that property owners and taxpayers have is, I only seem to see it going up all the time. How come it doesn't go the other direction?
I can say, in the 18 years I've been here, I believe there's been one that it went down. Yeah, so it just doesn't seem like property in Wyoming, the values ever actually decrease. I don't know if I could tell you off the top of my head what year that was.
2008?
I want to say that it was like, it must have been right about here when we saw this giant decrease from 9 to 10, which you kind of have to take with a grain of salt because it could have been 2008, but the way that minerals are valued, we're actually a year behind. So we see that giant value in 2009, but that's a reflection of high mineral prices in 2008. So that probably was the year between 2008 and 2009 that residential property went down.
But I think it's important for people to know that it can go the other direction.
It can. It can, and if it, I mean,
It can go the other direction.
from my personal standpoint, I would rather pay the higher taxes than see my property value go down. I definitely wouldn't want that, but you know, you'd save a few dollars on taxes for sure.
You touched a little bit on the 5-year mark, if someone's in their home for 5 years, could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Oh,
What it
so
means?
that was part of that homestead exemption bill. That would just be a stipulation in order to qualify to get that exemption. You wouldn't get it until you had lived in the house for 5 years.
So is that something that's happening or something that's gonna be voted on?
It's right now, it's an active bill down in the legislature in Cheyenne. So I by the time it passes, if it is to pass, I'm guessing that a lot of these numbers could change. The percent of fair market value that they're looking to exempt and the total cap on it, and maybe even that residency requirement. I mean, it's in the process where maybe right now as we speak, some legislature says, no, I don't like that 5 years. I want to make it 3, or I want to make it 10. It could go either way. So, you know, that's where John Winters and Ed Cooper come in. They're down there working on that stuff right now.
So that doesn't include an elderly person living in a mobile home? That doesn't include a mobile home?
The creating the 4th class of property, the way they have it worded right now is residential real property, and mobile homes are personal property.
Right, so there's nothing for someone in a mobile home?
No, and I wouldn't say that there's nothing. Some of these exemptions, yes, would apply to a mobile home, but those constitutional amendments, the way that they're currently worded, would not bring mobile homes with them into that separate class, and that's the class that they're looking to put the exemption on. So they probably need to expand on that to include mobile homes, in my opinion, because we have quite a few of those here. If you give an exemption to homeowners and not those, then you're gonna definitely be creating some inequity.
I was gonna say, that you mentioned the relief that's present now, in which, we were recently in Cheyenne as county commissioners, and the WCCA supported those immediate measures, the ones that you referred to earlier about being able to address the concerns for less fortunate and elderly, and their increased taxes now. They would have an effect on those folks in the home, correct? I mean, if they qualify income-wise, for
Yes.
relief from the state, they would have the benefits of that, whether they live in a mobile home or whether they live in a non-mobile home, correct?
It would, because the way that those work right now is they apply to any property that's your residence. So even if you own a store downtown and live up above it, it's going to apply to that commercial property as well. So commercial property, residential property, and mobile home personal property, those types of exemptions would apply to them. Which is another reason that I'm in favor of them. If that's where you live, that's where the exemption should be applied.
I think we're gonna kind of have to wrap it up. Is everybody good with this for now? One burning
I'd like to
question?
thank you and Daniel both. This has been
Okay.
very informative. Thank
All right,
you.
well, I do want to say that, Michael, can you tell us where they can find this video?
Yes, it'll be loaded on a website called HotSpringsSpotlight.com. HotSpringsSpotlight.com.
Do you want to share it with somebody that
And-
could make it?
It'll be
3?
a day or two.
Yeah, probably a day or two before.
If anybody has any other questions, just come over to the office anytime and ask them.
Bring food, Daniel really
Yeah,
likes.
yeah, that would be fine, sure.
See that easy?
You bet.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And we do have a couple of things in the back that you might want to check with the ladies back there on it, so.